If you're a fan of our lady detectives in Botswana and you are curious what comes next for our newly married and are now freshly engaged characters, then today's book just might be for you. Today we will be taking a look at Blue Shoes and Happiness by Alexander McCall Smith. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're taking a look at the 7th book in the No.1 Ladies Detective Agency series. And as usual, I'm going to give you guys a synopsis of the main storylines and then tell you what I really enjoy about this book, which, by the way, is basically everything, because I love this series and I have made that known since the beginning, and that's not going to change for this book either. I said it at the end of the book just before this. Grace and Puti Radaputi had started a relationship. They actually had gotten engaged. Puti Radaputi's dad had come and essentially asked on his son's behalf, and they get engaged. And Grace is happy to have finally found some kind of love. And this is one of the interesting storylines. There actually is going to be a moment where there's a little bit of confusion because Puti Radaputi, he is not totally sure how to act around a girl, and he gets some misleading information, and at one point he asks if she is a feminist, and of course Grace insists that she is, but she does not understand that he has a pretty radical perception of what a feminist is, and he thinks that this means that she's not interested in men being around. So that will be one of the points of tension that is to be resolved. Another issue, as you may remember in the previous book, Mr. Palapetsi is an individual that Precious had met. She had actually wrecked his bike, they had fixed it, and she had offered him some work at the detective agency. Actually, initially at the shop, and now a little bit of work at the detective agency. So this is where he takes on his first case, and he is going to go and help a group of people at a nature reserve resolve some issues of superstition. However, he is going to make a little mistake along the way. He's going to be really concerned that he is going to risk his relationship with Precious, but she, of course, has a huge heart and is grateful for the work that he does. Speaking of Precious and her really big heart, I think I've mentioned before that she calls herself traditionally built, which is code for being on the plus size. And this is one of the first books where she actually has a real concern about her weight. One of the 2 cases that she takes on involves going to the hospital and collecting some information, and along the way she gets more and more, hints that her being overweight could cause some long-term problems. And so she is actually going to try and go on a diet with minimal success. She is eventually going to decide that really just being happy is what's most important to her, which fits the theme of these books by and large, I would say. So there are a couple cases that she takes on in this book that are actually more directly from the agency itself, and not just because of her relationships, which I've mentioned in a couple of the books just before that. That tends to be where the cases are coming from. And so she has one case where she's looking into a cook who is actually being blackmailed, and then another case which deals with a doctor who is suspected of some, illegal activities. And those cases, of course, I'll let you read the book to find out exactly how they resolve themselves, but those are the 2 big cases in which she gets involved. And as usual, there is a resolution of them. They're not always, some drama scene resolution, and sometimes there are. And these are 2 pretty interesting cases that make this an appealing read. Oh, and I should mention, looking back at the title of the book in reference to Blue Shoes, I've said this before, that Grace loves shoes. It's one of her big indulgences, and now that she is engaged, she feels like she can be a little more indulgent. And something I didn't mention in the last book is Puti Radaputi. He's not necessarily wealthy, but his dad does have a successful furniture business, and he, of course, is very involved in the business, so he has some resources. They don't quite say exactly how wealthy he is, but this will certainly change Grace's lot in life. And so we're starting to see her become a little more impulsive, and so she buys a pair of impractical, expensive blue shoes that don't even fit her. And I think that matches the theme of the rest of this book, especially looking at Precious trying to lose weight, or just the general idea of relationships between them. And so that is a key part of the book, and I think it's pretty indicative of the rest of the series and just the way that Grace approaches life. And this will continue to be an issue, not just her and shoes, but as she is getting more resources and changing her situation in life, especially her societal standing, you'll start to see that affect the way Grace considers things, and that'll be an ongoing element in the books. So those are the main points of this novel. As I've said, you do have the mysteries, which are very much interesting to me, but I think just as interesting are all of the relationships between everyone, and I think this is a fine example of those relationships. Last review, I started looking at some of my favorite lines from the books, because again, Those little aphorisms are some of my favorite parts of this whole series. And so again, I would like to provide just a few of those that I really enjoyed. Here's some funny ones. It was difficult to think what to do, and as she often did in such circumstances, Grace decided that the best thing to do would be to go shopping. Anybody can lose, cautioned Mr. JLB Matakoni. You need to remember that every time you win. I think that's a great little life lesson. Oh, I love this one. None of us know how we will cope with snakes until the moment arises, and then most of us find out that we do not do it very well. And then I really enjoy this one. Well, that's the important thing, isn't it, ma'am? To feel happiness and then to remember it. Of course, there's a ton more quotes from these books that you can find that are either humorous, lighthearted, or provide real nuggets of wisdom. And again, that's one of the things that I really enjoy about this series. I would say overall, this is, I enjoy all these books. This one does not have any of the same major events that we've seen up to this point. So the book just before this, we saw an introduction of a couple new characters that are going to be important. Before that, we saw the actual wedding of Mr. JLB Matakoni and Precious. So I would say that in that respect, this book doesn't have as many dramatic elements, but on the other hand, I think it also gives a little more room for the detective elements to play a bigger role. And so I would say that that is one of the main features of this particular book. But as I've said, in all these books, I love them. I think they're great. However, this is not going to be for everyone because this is the 7th book in this series. So you do need to have read all the books before this. You could try and read this on its own. I think you would probably still enjoy most of it, but obviously all of these questions of the relationships between everyone might be a little harder to fully appreciate or to realize what exactly is going on at certain points. But I think the mysteries would still stand. Anyway, that's not how I'd recommend going about doing it. And so I wouldn't recommend this for anyone that is not read the books before this. And I also wouldn't recommend this series for anyone that is not particularly interested in this kind of lighthearted approach and this emphasis on the relationship of the main characters and not the actual mysteries that are involved. Although I do think, I always say that, I do want to be clear that I do think that mysteries are also very interesting. I think the author does a great way at tying them in and making them an important part of the story, but always keeping the relationships of the individuals the priority. And so I think it's really a mix of both of them. But if that is not going to appeal to you, then this book's not going to be for you either. But please let me know what you guys think about this book or this series as a whole, what you think about these characters. If you're a fan of the new characters that have been introduced in the last couple books, please let me know in the comments. But don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.